I'm Richard Grant, founder of the Grant Corporation, and if you're reading this on your phone or laptop you're probably thinking this sounds like one of those messy billionaire confession threads on social media, but it's not fiction to me, it's my life, and I'm here to spill everything because people only see the headlines: CEO's son marries socialite, family dynasty collapses, without knowing the old man behind the scenes. In my previous life, after decades of grinding in New York, expanding Grant Corp from a small shipping company into a multi-sector giant, I thought my retirement would be smooth: a Florida beach, a scotch in my hand, my son Alexander Grant, everyone called him Alex, taking over as the archetypal American golden boy CEO. Instead, the kid let himself get brainwashed by Emily White, a so-called angelic charity worker who played the helpless sweetheart card on every man she met. Because of her, Alex broke off his engagement with Samantha Lewis, the eldest daughter of the Lewis financial family, a match I had arranged carefully not out of greed but because the two houses complemented each other. Her father ran a private equity empire, her mother had political clout, and together they were supposed to anchor Grant Corp into the next century. Alex didn't just cancel the wedding, he humiliated Samantha publicly, turned the rehearsal dinner into a scandal, and to make it worse he brought in Mike Lewis, Samantha's own older brother, who barely had a high school diploma, as a special consultant inside Grant Corp just to insult the Lewises. That single stupid move nuked our entire network of trust. Investors fled, rumors spread, our stock tanked. And because I'm an old fool who believed in father-son loyalty, I handed Alex too much power and watched helplessly as decades of work disintegrated. When the board finally forced me out, I was left with nothing but a pension, and even that disappeared when Alex's reckless leverage triggered lawsuits and asset freezes. By the time the dust settled, my health had broken down, my wife had left me to care for her aging parents in California, and I ended up in a second-rate nursing home outside Newark, surrounded by peeling paint, lukewarm soup, and orderlies who saw an old man without visitors as easy prey. They stole from me, mocked me, shoved me around, and I, Richard Grant, once on the cover of Forbes, died there like a forgotten file in a dark cabinet. Don't think I didn't rage. In those final moments I replayed every warning I'd ignored, every time I told Alex, "You'll understand when you're older," every time I assumed blood meant loyalty. I thought of Samantha's pale face at the broken engagement, of Daniel Grant, me nephew who'd been studying in Germany sending me worried emails I never answered, of Emily White's crocodile tears as she posed for paparazzi. My life ended like a bad meme about boomer CEOs who lose everything because of spoiled heirs. But the universe, God, karma, whatever you want to call it, gave me a glitch. I woke up one morning not in that filthy nursing home but in my penthouse on Fifth Avenue, 30 pounds lighter, my ticker strong, my calendar showing the date of Alex and Samantha's rehearsal dinner the very day everything went off the rails. It wasn't a dream, my phone had the same apps, same news, same portfolio. The only difference was me, a mind full of future headlines, a heart burning with a second chance. And I swear on everything, I wasn't going to play the polite old man this time. I was going to crash my son's fantasy, drag him out of the influencer baiting bubble, and save not just Grant Corp but every person he'd hurt. That morning I dressed in my sharpest navy suit, checked the wedding contract I'd signed with the Lewis family, and called my driver. The city outside roared like always, horns, steam rising from subway grates, digital billboards screaming new IP os, but to me it was a battlefield. If Alex thought he was the protagonist of some CEO romance system, script where the heroine magically forgives him, he was about to find out his father had entered the game as a player. I was going to walk into that hotel ballroom before he could announce his betrayal, slap him if I had to, and lock the deal with Samantha Lewis right then and there. No more polite negotiations, no more letting the system, whatever demonic algorithm or psychological loop had infected his brain, control our family. This was my timeline now, my redemption arc, and the first move would be to stop the public humiliation of a good woman and anchor the Grant-Lewis alliance before it dissolved. Everything after that, the restructuring of the board, the fate of Emily White, the role Daniel would play, would hinge on what I did in the next few hours. I gripped my phone and drafted a post I'd never dared write before: "If your kid is about to throw away a billion-dollar future for a fling, would you intervene?" The likes and comments flooded in instantly, but I didn't care about clout. I cared about results. I had been given back my youth, my voice, and my authority, and this time I would wield them without hesitation. The hotel ballroom at the Waldorf smelled of lilies, expensive perfume, and panic disguised as celebration, and as I strode in under the chandelier light, every cell in my body vibrated with déjà vu, because I'd been here before as a powerless old man trapped in my own bad timeline, but this time I was the storm. I could see Alex standing at the edge of the stage in his tailored tux, glancing at his phone where Emily White's name pulsed like a forbidden ringtone, and I could practically hear the script running in his head, the same lines he'd thrown at Samantha last time about following his heart, about how money couldn't buy love, about how she deserved someone better, garbage lines copied from some romance drama feed, and I swore I wasn't going to let him deliver them again. Samantha Lewis was there too, radiant in a champagne-colored gown, trying to smile while her father whispered to a senator and her mother scanned the crowd with the cold eyes of a political operator, and even Mike Lewis was lurking by the buffet, probably rehearsing his own plan to sneak into Grant Corp after the public breakup. I didn't wait for the master of ceremonies. I marched straight to the stage, my shoes clicking like gunfire on marble, grabbed the mic and said in a voice that cut through the string quartet, "Ladies and gentlemen, forgive the interruption, but as founder of Grant Corporation and father of the groom, I have an announcement." Heads turned, phones came up, the hashtag engines of social media ignited, and Alex's face went white. Before he could open his mouth I reached out, gripped his wrist, and whispered so only he could hear, "Not this time, son." Then, louder, "This wedding proceeds as planned. My son will honor his commitment to Samantha Lewis. Any rumors to the contrary are false." Gasps rippled like a tide, and Alex tried to pull free, hissing, "Dad, you don't understand," but I raised my hand and, yes, slapped him, not out of cruelty but like snapping someone out of hypnosis. "You're my son," I said through clenched teeth, "and I won't let you destroy yourself or this company for a fling." Emily White, who had been lurking near the back in a designer knockoff dress, tried to step forward, but I cut her off with a steel-edged smile. "Miss White, this is a private family matter. Please leave." Security, already on alert because of my text to the head of staff, moved discreetly to escort her out before she could stage her martyr scene. The room buzzed like a hornet's nest, but I kept my grip on the narrative, addressing the guests as if nothing unusual had happened. Grant Corporation and the Lewis family have built decades of trust. Today we cement that alliance. Enjoy the reception. In my peripheral vision Samantha's eyes widened, shock, hurt, maybe a flicker of relief, and her mother nodded almost imperceptibly at me. Alex, meanwhile, looked like a cornered animal, but the script he'd been following had just burned up in my hands. I guided him down from the stage, murmuring low so no mic could pick it up, "You're going to sit next to your bride, smile for the cameras, and we'll discuss everything afterward. If you want to rebel, do it in private, not on live stream." He glared at me with the same defiance I once had at his age, but under that I could see confusion, like a gamer whose cheat code stopped working. The reception rolled on in a surreal blur, speeches, champagne toasts, a slideshow of childhood photos. Alex kept checking his phone but my staff had already blocked Emily's number. Samantha maintained her poise, but I noticed her fingers trembling as she lifted her glass. I wanted to tell her I was sorry for everything, that in another life I had watched her be humiliated and I'd come back to make it right, but all I could do was hold the structure together for now. As night fell over Manhattan and the guests drifted toward the dance floor, I slipped into a side room with Alex, locked the door, and gave him the blunt truth. "Listen, son, you think you're in love, but what you're really in is a trap. Emily isn't who you think she is, and the system feeding your ego doesn't care if you burn. I'm your father, and I'm telling you if you don't break out now you'll lose everything: your freedom, your kids, your mind." He laughed bitterly. "You sound crazy," but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "You'll thank me later," I said, and walked out before he could argue, because the next phase of my plan required allies. In the hallway Daniel Grant had just arrived from the airport, his tie still crooked from the flight, and when our eyes met I saw the steady competence that had been missing in Alex. "Uncle Richard," he said quietly, "is it happening again?" I nodded once. Not if we move fast, I replied, handing him a folder with emergency restructuring plans for Grant Corp. He glanced through it, jaw tightening. And Samantha? He asked. Protected for now, I said, but she's going to need a real partner, not a self-destructing CEO. Daniel didn't answer, but his expression told me he understood more than I had said. Back in the ballroom, the band struck up a jazz standard, cameras flashed, and I watched my son dance stiffly with his bride, a performance for an audience he no longer controlled. On social media the narrative had already flipped: Grant Lewis wedding trending, speculation about corporate strategy, Emily White's name buried under a wave of memes about old money discipline. I sipped a glass of bourbon and let the burn steady my nerves. This was only the opening salvo. Alex still thought he could fight me behind the scenes. Emily would not vanish quietly. Mike Lewis would sniff for any chance to slip into our accounts. And the deeper force the mysterious CEO system I'd only begun to suspect was still out there, rewriting people's impulses like bad code. But tonight, at least, I had snatched the steering wheel back from destiny. The alliance with the Lewis family was intact, the public humiliation averted, and the board of Grant Corp would wake up tomorrow to a narrative of stability instead of scandal. In my previous life this was the point where everything spiraled. In this life it would be the point where the counterattack began. I looked at Daniel across the room. He raised his glass in silent acknowledgement. The next move's transferring control, isolating Alex from company funds, shielding Samantha, rescuing the unborn twins from a toxic future were already clicking into place in my mind like a chessboard. For the first time in years I felt not just anger but purpose, the cold clean purpose of a man rewriting his own script. When the last guests left the Waldorf and the #storm cooled to a simmer I finally exhaled, but in my head I was already drawing the next battlefield because stopping Alex from detonating his wedding was just a holding action. The real war was about control of Grant Corporation and the lives entangled in it. The following morning I called an emergency family breakfast at our Fifth Avenue Penthaceno lawyers, no PR people, just blood relatives and coffee strong enough to melt a spoon, and laid the cards on the table. Alex showed up late, sunglasses on, jaw tight, still in damage control mode from his blocked messages with Emily White, while Daniel arrived early with a notebook and a quiet readiness I'd never seen in my own son. I looked at them both and said, "I'm invoking the Founder's Clause." Effective immediately, day-to-day operations of Grant Corp transfer to Daniel as interim CEO while Alex takes a leave of absence to focus on his private life. Alex exploded, calling me a dictator, saying I couldn't just sideline him, but the paperwork was already filed with the board at dawn and the board, burned by his last stunt, had unanimously approved. I kept my tone level. "You're not fired, Alex. You're being protected from yourself. You're still a Grant, but you've got to step back before you burn the whole house." He slammed his coffee cup down, muttered something about no one understanding true love, and stormed out, leaving Daniel and me in the quiet aftermath. Daniel flipped through the transition documents with quick precision. "I can steady the company," he said, "but what about Samantha?" That was the unspoken bomb in the room. Samantha Lewis, now legally Alex's wife, was stuck between a crumbling marriage and a corporate alliance. I told Daniel the plan: we would create a parallel support system for her inside the company, shield her from Alex's tantrums, and over time make it clear she had a future beyond being a pawn. Daniel nodded grimly. He'd always respected her from afar. The next weeks played out like a slow-motion version of a hostile takeover. I restructured the executive team, cut off Alex's discretionary accounts, installed Daniel as the public face of Grant Corp., and began untangling the toxic contracts Alex had signed under Emily's influence. Alex responded by retreating to a rented loft in Brooklyn with Emily, posting cryptic messages about freedom and real love on social media that turned into memes about fallen heirs. The tabloids feasted, but for once our stock held steady because Daniel projected calm competence on every earnings call. Behind the scenes, though, I was working overtime, moving key assets out of Alex's reach, meeting with the Lewises to reassure them, and privately arranging medical checkups for Samantha because I knew from my previous life that Emily's schemes would soon endanger more than reputations. When Samantha confided to me one evening that she couldn't take Alex's threats anymore, had been calling her from burner phones demanding money for Emily's medical bills, I gave her my word she would be safe and told her to keep every message as evidence. Daniel started appearing at her side at charity events as the de facto representative of Grant Corp., and the media began whispering about a new power duo, without knowing the half of it. Meanwhile, Emily White's mask began to crack. She showed up at the Grant lobby screaming about conspiracies, had to be escorted out by security, and a week later was admitted to St. Mary's Mental Health Center after an incident in a Midtown hotel. Alex visited her obsessively, draining his trust fund on her care, and then made his biggest blunder yet. He demanded that Samantha donate blood for a supposed emergency transfusion for Emily, spinning some story about universal compatibility that was pure manipulation. In my old timeline I'd stood by powerless while he made that demand. This time I stepped in, intercepted him in the hospital corridor, and when he tried to shove a consent form in Samantha's face I ripped it up and told him, "If you ever pressure her again you'll be dealing with my lawyers and the police." Daniel, standing behind me, took one step forward and with one cold punch knocked Alex back into reality. Security separated them, but the message was delivered. The days of indulging his drama were over. Alex ended up spending 15 days in county lockup for disorderly conduct after an unrelated nightclub fight, during which time I quietly filed for guardianship of the twins Emily had just given birth to. Yes, twinsome grandchildren born into chaos. In the previous life they'd grown up neglected, in this life I wasn't going to let that happen. While Alex spiraled and Emily disappeared into treatment, I brought the infants home to the penthouse nursery, hired the best pediatric team, and personally took night shifts rocking them to sleep. It was the strangest, most humbling chapter of my second life, a billionaire founder changing diapers at 3 a.m. because he refused to repeat history. The media spun it as, Grant patriarch cares for grandchildren, but they didn't know the half of it. Each bottle I prepared felt like a small act of penance for the man I'd been and a shield for the future I was building. Daniel stepped up even more, running the company by day and reading bedtime stories to the babies by night when I collapsed from exhaustion. Samantha, freed from Alex's harassment, started volunteering in the company's community programs, finding her own voice beyond being the wronged bride. Slowly the Grant Corporation began to recover its old shine, not just in revenue but in reputation, and investors who had once fled now whispered about the Grant turnaround. But under the glow of progress I never forgot the shadow, the mysterious system that had warped Alex's mind in the first place. Late at night after the twins were asleep I'd pore over tech reports, behavioral studies, anything that hinted at a manipulative algorithm or underground network feeding these CEO romance fantasies into real lives. I started feeding tips to a contact in the U.S. Federal Research Agency, hinting that our family was a live case study. In the mirror I no longer saw the helpless old man from the nursing home, I saw a father general leading a long campaign, a man holding 2 babies in his arms while drafting battle plans. Part 3 of my story wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about construction, building a new management, a new family structure, a firewall around the next generation. Alex might think he was the hero of some tragic love story, but by the time he realized the system was gone he'd find the empire rebuilt without him and the children safe. And as Daniel and Samantha's partnership deepened under the public radar, I knew the next phase, the confrontation with the system itself and Alex's final reckoning, was drawing close. By the time spring rolled over Manhattan the twins were sleeping through the night and Grant Corporation's quarterly numbers looked like a rocket chart, but beneath that glossy surface my real campaign had shifted from rebuilding to hunting, because I knew Alex wasn't acting alone, not really, that some invisible CEO system had been pushing him towards self-destruction the way a predatory algorithm pushes kids into gambling apps, and I wasn't going to let my family stay a beta test. Every evening after board meetings I'd retreat to my study with a bourbon and a laptop, combing through Alex's old devices, decrypting his message logs, cross-referencing weird app permissions with the contacts I'd quietly built inside the U.S. Federal Research Agency. The deeper I dug the clearer the pattern became: targeted ads, subliminal prompts, even push notifications that mirrored the tropes of those online billionaire romance stories. The hero must abandon his arranged bride, the angelic girl needs saving, destroy the old order to be reborn, all packaged as self-improvement guidance, but in reality pure behavioral manipulation. FRA's cyberpsych team went pale when they saw my evidence and opened a covert operation codenamed Project Breakscript. While they traced the servers and legal frameworks, I worked the human side. Daniel and Samantha were now the quiet heart of Grant Corp, building programs for employee welfare and community outreach, while I took public credit as a hands-on patriarch to draw the cameras away from them. In private, Daniel and I trained like boxers in a gym, mock debates, scenario planning, security drills, because the closer we got to shutting the system down the more desperate Alex became. He was still in that Brooklyn loft with Emily's old friends, posting rants about corporate tyranny and the real Grant bloodline, and when his trust fund finally ran dry he tried to rally a group of disaffected ex-employees into some kind of startup rebellion. I didn't block him, I watched, because FRA needed a live feed of the system's endgame. Then one night my phone buzzed with an encrypted message: server seized. System offline. I stared at the screen for a long time, feeling both victory and dread, because this was the moment I'd been planning for and also the moment my son would wake up from his digital dream without a script. Sure enough, within days Alex showed up at Grant Tower looking 10 years older, eyes bloodshot, wearing a wrinkled hoodie instead of a suit. He didn't storm security this time, he asked to see me. In the executive lounge he sat across from me, hands trembling, and said, "Dad, I don't know what happened. Everything feels empty. I think I messed up." Hearing that was like glass under my ribs. I'd wanted him to snap out of it but not to break. I told him quietly, "The system's gone, Alex. What you're feeling is reality. You've hurt a lot of people. Now you have to face them." He asked about Emily. I told him she was still in treatment and that the twins were safe. For a moment he looked like the boy who used to ride on my shoulders during 4th of July parades. Then he whispered, "Can I come back to the company?" That was the hardest moment of my second life. Everything in me wanted to say yes, to pull him back into the fold, but I remembered the old timeline, the lawsuits, the victims. I shook my head. "You're not ready. This isn't about shares or titles anymore. You need to rebuild yourself first. Start by apologizing to Samantha. Start by owning what you did." He flinched like I'd hit him again but didn't argue. Instead he asked if he could at least see the kids. "In time," I said. "Right now they need stability." We sat in silence with the skyline behind us, the Hudson glinting like a blade. Finally he stood up, shoulders sagging, and left without another word. I didn't chase him. My duty was to the living, not to the fantasy he'd chased. That night Daniel and I went over the final stage of our plan, formally transferring controlling interest of Grant Corp to a family trust managed by Daniel and Samantha, with me as a limited advisor, locking out any future attempt by Alex or an external system to hijack the company again. We signed the documents in my study while the twins slept upstairs, their soft breathing a counterpoint to the click of pens on paper. For the first time since my rebirth I felt a strange peace, not triumph exactly but a steady knowledge that the machine which had ruined our lives was dismantled and the next generation was protected. On social media the story spun itself, Grant Corporation under new leadership, founder focuses on grandchildren, while the memes about Alex faded into nostalgia threads about what happens when a rich kid goes off script. In the mirror I looked older again, the weight of the campaign settling into my bones, but this time it was a good kind of tired. Part 4 of my story wasn't fireworks, it was the slow click of a lock closing, the completion of a firewall built out of discipline, love and hard choices. Yet I knew it wasn't the end. Alex still had to find his own redemption. Daniel and Samantha had to navigate the public glare as a couple who had inherited not just a corporation but a complicated history. And I, Richard Grant, had to figure out how to live a life that wasn't just fighting disasters but actually enjoying the quiet mornings with 2 small children who would one day ask me why their father wasn't there. The confrontation with the system was over, but the confrontation with ourselves, the part where we turn survival into a future that was about to begin, and that's where the next chapter of this saga starts. Summer hit New York like a blast furnace, and for the first time in 2 lives I wasn't running to put out a fire at Grant Corporation but waking up at dawn to make pancakes for 2 toddlers who now called me Grandpa Rich in their garbled baby talk, and while the tabloids still ran think pieces about the fall and rise of the Grant dynasty, my daily reality was diaper changes, board calls on mute, and long walks through Central Park pushing a double stroller with Daniel and Samantha walking a few paces behind like a pair of Secret Service agents turned young parents. The trust was finalized, the company stable, Project Break script shut down, yet a gnawing question kept me awake at night: if Alex had been manipulated into destroying himself once, what would stop another system, another predator, from targeting the next generation? So part 5 of my story started not with a press conference but with a promise whispered to 2 sleepy children that I'd build them a world where no algorithm could script their lives. Daniel and Samantha had grown into their new roles with the kind of quiet strength you don't see on magazine covers. He ran the boardroom with surgical precision, she reshaped our philanthropy arm into a nationwide network of mentorship programs, and together they'd become the public face of a gentler, smarter Grant Corp. I stayed in the background as emeritus founder, the old man with a stroller who occasionally dropped a viral post about leadership or parenting, and that online persona gave me an unexpected weapon: people trusted me again. Through private groups and DMs, whistleblowers from other families started sending me stories: sons and daughters pushed into catastrophic decisions by mysterious guidance apps, marriages sabotaged by destiny coaches, even small businesses wrecked by invisible nudges. What had happened to Alex wasn't an isolated freak event, it was an emerging underground industry of behavioral manipulation dressed up as self-help. I realized my redemption arc couldn't end at my own front door. With Daniel's blessing, I set up a covert task force inside our cybersecurity division, codenamed SafeScript, staffed with young coders who'd grown up inside these algorithmic traps and wanted revenge. We built detection tools, partnered with regulators quietly, and by fall we were intercepting new systems before they reached public release. The irony wasn't lost on me: a man who had once lost everything to overcontrol was now building a voluntary safety net for strangers. Meanwhile, Alex began reappearing in the periphery of our lives. He got a day job at a community center in Queens, no more designer clothes, no entourage, just a guy handing out food boxes and trying to stay sober. He texted me once a week, short updates, no demands, and after months of consistency I let him visit the twins under supervision. The first time he held them he broke down crying, and something in my chest unclenched. This wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was the first real step. Samantha stayed polite but distant, Daniel kept watch like a hawk but never blocked contact. We all understood this was a fragile experiment. As for me, I started writing down the whole story, not the sanitized press version but the raw, messy truth you're reading no on a private blog that somehow went viral, turning my cautionary tale into a kind of serial webnovel about a reborn CEO fighting a shadow system. Teenagers quoted my lines as memes, business schools debated my ethics, and ex-employees sent me letters saying they finally understood why I'd made the choices I did. I didn't plan it, but the blog became both therapy and weapon. The more sunlight we shone on the manipulation industry, the weaker its grip became. By winter, SafeScript had shut down 3 major destiny platforms and forced 2 more to pivot into legitimate coaching. Daniel and Samantha launched a public-facing nonprofit, the Lewis Grant Foundation, to fund independent research on algorithmic ethics, and I stood behind them on stage at the launch event holding the twins, thinking how different this scene was from the wedding day that had once destroyed us. Alex sat in the front row, clean-shaven, hands folded, looking like a man who'd finally woken up. After the speeches he came up to me, voice steady, and said, "Dad, I'm not asking for my old life back. I just want to help you build this." I told him, helping starts with work, not titles. "You're welcome to volunteer at the foundation." He nodded without flinching. In that moment I realized my second life's real victory wasn't saving a corporation, it was breaking a cycle. The old Richard Grant had believed blood alone guaranteed loyalty, the reborn Richard Grant understood loyalty had to be earned, even within a family. Part 5 of my story is less about boardroom battles and more about weaving a new fabric out of shredded threads: Alex's slow redemption, Daniel and Samantha's steady rise, the twins' protected childhood, and my own shift from fighter to builder. I'm still wary, still scanning the horizon for the next predatory system, but now I have an army of allies, a family rebuilt on consent instead of coercion, and a public platform that turns my mistakes into warnings for others. And as I watch the twins chase pigeons across a park bench while Daniel and Samantha plan the next Foundation summit, I feel for the first time that my life after rebirth is not just a reaction to tragedy but a blueprint for a future where no one has to live out a scripted downfall. The saga isn't over. There are still larger networks behind the scenes, international players we haven't touched yet, but Part 5 closes this chapter on a note of cautious hope, setting the stage for whatever battles or reconciliations come next. Snow was still crusting the edges of Central Park when the next wave hit, not a tabloid scandal but an encrypted dossier slid under my door at the penthouse at 2 a.m., no return address, just a flash drive labeled Mirror. On it were documents, chat logs, and server maps pointing to an international consortium based out of Singapore and Zurich that had been funding the very Destiny systems we'd been dismantling. SafeScript's coders had suspected there was a bigger spider behind the web. Now we had a glimpse of the nest. Reading those files felt like déjà vu from my first life, when I'd stared at hostile takeover paperwork and realized my empire was already gone. Only this time I wasn't alone. By morning Daniel and Samantha were in my study, their laptops open, coffee steaming, the twins still asleep upstairs, while Alex deliberately sat across from me, sober and alert, wearing a simple button-down instead of a hoodie. I told him, "This isn't a board meeting. This is a war council. You want a second chance? Earn it here." He didn't blink. "Tell me what to do." For the first time since my rebirth I felt the old weight shift off my shoulders. The boy who'd once burned everything down was at least willing to help build something. We split the tasks. Daniel and our cyber team would trace the financial flows, Samantha would handle the legal and diplomatic cover, Alex would go undercover online into the darker forums where these systems recruited their marks, using his own past as bait. I became the point of contact with the FRA, officially an informant, but in reality a strategist. The following weeks blurred into a kind of digital trench warfare, false leads, burner phones, late-night conference calls with agencies whose acronyms I wasn't allowed to write down. The consortium, calling itself the Mirror Group, had a slick narrative about personalized life coaching, but behind the curtain it was manipulating inheritance battles, sabotaging arranged marriages, even steering political candidates, an entire industry built on turning real people into characters in someone else's script. We hit them where it hurt, freezing accounts, exposing code, leaking whistleblower testimonies. Each victory was a headline in some obscure tech blog, but to me it was another brick pulled from the enemy's fortress. Meanwhile Alex was proving himself in small, unglamorous ways: hours of chat infiltration, patient listening to victims, resisting the pull of the same manipulative language that had once owned him. Samantha surprised me by becoming the operation's moral anchor. When our legal team suggested using some of Mirror's tactics back against them, she drew a hard line. "We don't win by becoming them," she said, and her words cut through my fatigue like cold air. Daniel, steady as ever, coordinated our moves with surgical precision, his once shy voice now carrying across rooms full of suits and agents. At night, after the twins were asleep, I'd step out onto the balcony overlooking the city and feel a strange mix of pride and terror: pride at what we were building, terror at the size of what we'd provoked. Part 6 of my story is the shift from defense to offense, from a family trying to survive to a coalition trying to dismantle an entire hidden economy. It tested every lesson my second life had taught me: patience, delegation, the courage to let my grown children fight their own battles. There were near Mrs. Alex's cover almost blown when a recruiter recognized his old posts, a data center raid in Zurich that went sideways, but each time we adapted, learned, closed ranks. The twins, too young to understand, became our silent motivation. Pictures of their sleeping faces sat on every desk in the SafeScript war room like talismans. And slowly, inexorably, the mirror group began to fracture under the pressure. One partner flipped, then another, code leaks turned into public scandals, regulatory hounds from 3 continents pounced on their shell companies. We weren't naive, you knew there were still players we hadn't named, but by spring we had collapsed their main pipeline and handed enough evidence to the FRA to build a case that would echo for years. On the day the indictments dropped, I gathered Daniel, Samantha, and Alex in the same Waldorf ballroom where this whole saga had once begun. No cameras, no guests, just us and a few trusted allies. We stood in a circle under the chandeliers while the news tickers outside flashed, global coaching conglomerate exposed, and, Grant family whistleblowers assist authorities. I looked at my son, my nephew, my daughter-in-law and thought, this is what rebirth is supposed to mean, not just a do-over but a do-better. I told Alex, you've earned your place back, but not the old one. You'll head the Foundation's rehabilitation program for victims. No titles, no shares, just work. He accepted without flinching. Daniel would continue as CEO, Samantha as chair of the foundation, me as an advisor phasing out of the front lines. Outside, snowflakes drifted past the windows like ash and confetti all at once. Part 6 closes on that image, a family once scripted by someone else now writing its own future, aware there are still chapters ahead, healing, rebuilding, teaching, but no longer waiting for a system to tell us who to be.